Welcome to this edition of Diligence Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, and I'll be your host for today's show. Today, we're going to be talking about corporate director education and current board members' preferences and priorities. And joining me is somebody who's been pretty special to me along the years. Please welcome Jamie Tassa, who's the publisher for Corporate Board Member and Director of Events for the Chief Executive Group. Welcome, Jamie.
Thanks, TK. Pleasure to be here.
So those that don't know us, we were two pieces of a team that built the Corporate Board Member magazine and conference brand. And it's certainly a pleasure for me to see Jamie go on and be publisher and event guru today. So congratulations, Jamie. I knew that you would end up controlling all that stuff at some point, knowing that you always told me what to do. And also interesting is you handle all the chief executive events as well. And it was the chief executive group that actually bought Corporate Board Member from the New York Stock Exchange. So Jamie, I'm always surprised how you juggle everything. But then again, I'm an older guy and I'm multitask challenged, but you seem to always have a lot of balls in the air.
I have been blessed with a lot of energy, so I don't like to be bored, and running events and the magazine definitely keeps me busy. So it's all fun though, and I can tell everyone I would definitely not be in the position I'm in today if it weren't for Mr. TK. So thank you for giving me that passion for corporate governance 20 years ago.
Well, I didn't give you anything. I just sort of pointed out certain things, and same with my daughter. And the fact to see you and her and everybody involved in this space is very rewarding. So enough gushing. Let's get on with the question here. So Corporate Board Member recently conducted a research study to understand board members' preferences and priorities around board education. Obviously, that's important to you. It should be important to them. I thought much of the results was very insightful, but I wanted to look at some of the highlights. So the first thing I wanted to talk about with you is what board members thought their top priorities were as far as learning should be for the fourth quarter and the beginning of 2021. So talk a little bit about what they felt their priorities were.
Yeah, and just for a little bit of context, I mean, this time each year is when we start working on our editorial calendar and event programming for the following year. So we really wanted to make sure that we weren't doing that in a vacuum, that we were doing it with a real pulse on what directors' needs for education are. And so that was the goal of the survey. We had over 200 responses. We also went on a listening tour, Dan Bigman, our editor, and I, to really just have conversations with board members on what's going on right now. And really the findings reinforced what we thought the findings would be. It's no surprise that COVID-19 and recovery tops the list. I think, regardless of what industry you're in, everyone's been impacted by COVID. There's so much uncertainty around it. When you think of the board's role in strategic planning, obviously COVID is right at the heart of that. So not surprised to see that in the number one seat. And even in the number two spot, cybersecurity, that's very consistent. Tops the top three list of things that directors tell us keeps them up at night year after year from a risk oversight standpoint. And I think COVID has amplified that in the sense that, companies had to go remote so fast. And if you didn't already have a remote workforce, you didn't have time to stop and say, okay, what are all the protocols we need to have in place? And so now you have all these new potential, spots that you need to consider where, from a cybersecurity standpoint that companies are grappling with. And that cybersecurity really also goes hand in hand with the third topic, which is digital transformation. When we talk to CEOs and directors, so many people are saying our digital transformation strategies that were on a 3-year time frame have been implemented in a 3-month time frame because of COVID. And certainly, if you don't have a digital transformation strategy underway right now, you're behind the 8 ball. And so it's important, I think that you can't have a digital transformation strategy and a cybersecurity strategy in 2 different silos. Companies are interacting and sharing data with customers and partners in so many different ways now than we didn't even think about 10 years ago. So the cybersecurity planning really has to go hand in hand with that from a digital transformation. So I think those top 3 issues, really interweave themselves with each other. I think on the digital transformation standpoint, we are in the midst of our What Directors Think study for next year, which we're partnering with Diligent Institute on. And based on the first 300 responses we have to that survey, we asked, what is the most important internal element for the success of your company's strategy? And the number 1 indicator is cash reserves, and that was followed closely by digital transformation and technology upgrades and adoption. So that further supports, that from a board education priority standpoint, digital transformation. And then the third thing on the list that people are saying in What Directors Think study will determine success is talent. Was another pretty consistent theme in our conversations with directors, which is the 4th topic on the list of priorities. Looking at the S in ESG, we held an ESG board forum earlier this week, and there was pretty much consensus that pre-COVID, the E was getting a lot of attention, but post-COVID and all of the social unrest occurring all around us, the S has definitely moved to the top. The diversity and inclusion is right up there. It's top of every board's agenda, and not just how do we approach diversity from a check the box exercise, but really move the needle from an inclusion standpoint, which, I think before from a events and content standpoint, that was kind of a softer issue, but now it's a real, companies recognize that it's a game changer, and, boards are trying to get their arms around what's the culture in the company, what can we do better? How can we start at the top and push it through the organization? So I would say, again, top 5 priorities. The governance of ESG was the 5th, which is always consistent because that just boils down to the basic fiduciary duties of board members. So.
Well, that doesn't surprise me. Board members always want to talk about strategy, risk, and sustainability that ESG is involved in. So to me, all the topics that you said fall into those major categories. So strategy certainly is what you put together a board for. So another area I just want to touch on, don't want to spend much time on, is about how much time directors spend on board education. And I thought this was interesting. And I think the question was directed towards board education versus prepping for a meeting. Although when you prep for a meeting, sometimes there's a topic that you have to go do research on. So that may have counted as board education as well. Yeah. But I was surprised at the number of hours that some people spend on board education per week.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. 2/3 of directors say that they spend 1 to 4 hours a week. I don't think anyone said 0. So obviously I'm a little biased being in the board education space, but glad to know that people are spending time weekly. And I think equally interesting to me was that they're looking to consume that information in a lot of different ways. So there's no one size fits all to board education. And I think that's incumbent upon us serving the board community, all of us, that, we offer that, whether it's digital content or print content, or supplementing, since we can't do live events right now, coming up with online events. And at the end of the day, I think it's, the message we hear from directors is they want that peer-to-peer learning. They want to hear from other directors who, have experiences they can share and learn from. So whether that's, through the magazine research or events, how they can come together to learn from each other is important.
Yeah, no surprise to us back with our introduction of peer-to-peer for committees. So the last highlight I wanted to talk about was the board's involvement in the decision-making process. And again, it was so interesting with respect to, and I think you broke this down into three parts, what they wanted input on, wanted to be in the process, and then wanted to have a final decision. So and you only let them pick one. So I'm assuming if somebody
Right.
picked, they wanted to be in the final decision, that was especially important to them. But was interesting to me on the input side, the most telling area of wanting to have input in was the portal and communications area, that they wanted to make sure that they were getting the right kind, I guess, the right kind of information through that system to make them more effective as a board.
Yeah, I mean, and I hope that's not surprising to corporate secretaries. They should not be picking a portal in a vacuum. The directors are the ones who are going to be using it on a regular basis. And I would think as a director, I would want to know the features and have a say in the products that I'm going to be using. So I think any smart corporate secretary would be involving the board in that decision. And you're right, it was phrased so that they could only pick one answer, provide input, help assess, or give final approval. So on the board portals, they were very involved in the providing input and help assessing the providers.
Yeah. So the highest decision ones that they definitely did not want to be left out of the decision was the outside auditor choice, and then the selection of new CEOs or new board members. Those were far and away the ones that they said, okay, I'm checking the box that I want the final decision on these.
Yeah. And I mean, that makes sense in the sense in those with the auditor, the search firm, they're really reporting to the board in those cases. So, I think the one that surprised me was how much boards said that they were involved in the approval of corporate headquarters or major facility relocations. I think we focus a lot on that on the chief executive side, but less so on the corporate board member side. And based on the survey, the board really is involved in that approval process.
Well, Jamie, I wish we had more time. There's other things I'd like to pick apart. I don't know if this is a public survey or not. It was more internal. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was really meant to, help us guide our editorial and event programming for next year. But it tees up the What Directors Think study, which is our biggest study of the year that is going on, what's keeping directors up at night, which is the public survey that will be released at the start of the year.
Yeah, I know Diligent's excited to be a part of that. And I want to thank you for taking the time to join us and let us see the priorities of what we can expect on the months ahead. So thank you for taking the time.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a true pleasure.
And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.